Hello again, this is Mr. Scrinjar, Intervention Specialist at the Utica Shale Academy, and today I'm providing another informational video in reference to the SSCR American History course, and we're going to be working on Lesson 4, which is Founding Documents, Declaration of Independence, and we're going to go ahead and start off with the content statement number 4. The Declaration of Independence elaborates on the rights and the role of people in building the foundations of the American nation through the principles of unalienable rights and the consent of the people. The content elaboration, as you read down and through your lesson materials, reads, the Declaration of Independence was written to express the ideas that Americans believe government should be founded on. These ideals embodied in individual and civil liberties include unalienable rights, consent of the people, equality of rights for all citizens, and the responsibility of the government to protect the rights of its citizens. As we scroll down, there is a video that is provided. However, that video is not functioning, so we're just going to continue to go down with your lesson materials. As you scroll down, you're going to find out another box, or find another box that reads the Declaration of Independence. Inside that box, they say that the committee of men who drafted the Declaration of Independence knew that they were committing treason and could be executed for their crimes. You're going to see that there, treason is one of your bolded words, and you're going to see that throughout the lesson and answering questions. Thomas Jefferson is another bolded term, is the author of the Declaration of Independence, was very well educated. He was a gifted writer and as well as a scientist, inventor, lawyer, architect, and musician. As we continue to go on, we have Benjamin Franklin, another key individual throughout this lesson, and John Adams. Both supported Jefferson in writing this document. Then we scroll down, we'll see that the document was sent to England declaring colonist freedom. England is the governing body over the early colonies, and they felt as if that England was doing unjust things to them and with the laws, and that they felt it was time that they needed to break from that government. Document was adopted on July 4th, 1776 by the Continental Congress. Document established unalienable rights, and these unalienable rights are very, very important. So you have the three, and they are very well known, and that is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. As we scroll down, you're going to see that there's a little bit of a practice where you can fill in some words. Here, how to fill in the words, you're just going to look, they give you the words statement, grievances, pamphlet, committee, and benefits. And some of those words will be used throughout your lesson, but we'll go ahead and go through these. Let's start off with Thomas Paine. Thomas Paine wrote a pamphlet that convinced many colonists that there were no benefits to staying under British rule. So they were gaining nothing as being a colony all the way across the big ocean to be tied in with the England government or the British rule. The Second Continental Congress appointed a blank of 5 delegates. This is a committee. A committee is a group of people, and in that committee they were to draft a statement of independence from Great Britain. That statement became the Declaration of Independence. So you find the final little statement in there is among the blank of the colonists against King George III. So there were among the grievances. So a grievance is an injustice that's being done, and then it forms into a complaint. So a grievance is a complaint. So among the grievances of the colonists against King George III was his insistence on imposing taxes without their consent. Consent is that they have no voice, so they were being taxed without having any representation to say whether or not that tax was going to be profitable or was going to be something that is going to cause a little bit of problems with the colonists. So they felt that they weren't having a voice in what government was going on. So for this one, since with the video, I've also put together some very key points, things that you can go ahead and look at, and I titled them Key Learning Points and Concepts. And as you go through your questions, you're again going to see a Quizlet, and the Quizlet is going to have key vocabulary words and also key individual terms, and there are going to be some things that you're going to have to know that's going to be beneficial in answering your questions for this lesson. Let's go ahead and go through some of our flashcards that are found on the Quizlet. One being the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence was signed in 1776 by U.S. revolutionaries It declared the United States as a free state away from England. Your next term would be unalienable rights. These unalienable rights are rights that cannot be taken away. The next in your flashcards is the consent of the people. Consent of the people refers to the idea that government and laws derive their legitimacy from the consent of the governed. So when we want to look at the consent of the people is consent of the governed. So people and govern are tied together there. So that's a very key point when answering your questions and a key concept. The consent of the people refers to the consent of the governed. As we move down, we have civil liberties. Civil liberties are constitutional freedoms guaranteed to all citizens. Next is a very key word in here, because this is what England felt, that anyone who was against the British rule they were committing treason. Now, treason is betrayal of one's country. So they felt as if they're colonists, they belong to the British government, and they are going against the British government because they're declaring their independence. In King George III's mind, that was considered being treason. And treason, again, betrayal of one's country. Next is Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence. Very key information. Thomas Jefferson, one of our key individuals in this lesson. The next is Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin is key in this lesson because he supported Thomas Jefferson. He supported the writing of the Declaration of Independence. As you scroll down, you're going to see that there's some information about John Adams, like we had found in our lesson material. John Adams was another individual who strongly supported the writing of the Declaration of Independence. Thomas Paine is another important individual within the lesson. Thomas Paine was an American revolutionary leader and published a pamphlet, like we had just read, and that pamphlet was called Common Sense. And we'll go ahead and talk more about that. There are some other key words, key terms, which is grievance. A grievance, we had talked before, is an injustice, and in the sense of this lesson, a grievance is going to be a complaint. So some type of complaint. The next is the consent of the governed, and the consent of the governed, like I said before, govern is tied with people, so it's the consent of the people. So I have here consent of the governed refers to the consent of the people. So in other words, I put governed equals people. And then we can keep going on. The central point of the Declaration of Independence is that the colonists believed that they should be better represented in Parliament. So they felt that they weren't being represented in the Parliament, Parliament referring to the British government. Therefore, they didn't feel they were getting the proper representation or voice in how they were governed and the decisions that were impacting them. They didn't feel like they were being involved and just had the proper representation so that they could actually be a part of their government. The next, as you scroll down in your answers, when you're answering questions for the lesson, you're going to see that there is a video. The video is very important because it does have a ton of great information that is going to help you out when answering your questions. One of the big questions when you keep in mind when watching the video is that you're going to be looking for some of the people that they talk about, some big time names. So one of your questions, and this is why it's important to watch the video, one of your questions says identify the two writers mentioned that helped create this social contract theory. Now, in that video, they're going to discuss the social contract theory, and the social contract theory you can see is best represented in the second part of the Declaration of Independence. Another note that is very important. During the Enlightenment era, the social contract theory was formed. So a very key point that was formed during this, the Enlightenment era. And the social contract theory is an important concept throughout this lesson, and it's something that is highlighted in the video. Those members who drafted the Declaration of Independence knew that they could be held for the treason. A key concept. They can be held for treason because what they're doing is they're going against that country of England in order to gain their own independence. And the colonists, that's what their goal was. They wanted to be independently governed. So when they did that, they are actually going against the British government, which is considered treason. As we continue with some key concepts, King George III did not agree with the colonists. He didn't agree with the colonists' demands. because he felt that the members of the First Continental Congress were traitors. That's a key point as well. He felt that those people who were making up that what they considered the First Continental Congress, they were all traitors against the British government. As we keep going, please keep in mind that that a grievance is some sort of injustice. So grievances were claimed by the colonists. They felt like there were definitely definite injustices happening to them by the British government. So we're looking at that as, and it's used in such a letter to, for instance, I gave an example. A grievance, again, is a complaint. And just as an example, example of a grievance is a letter to possibly to the city mayor, and maybe that letter, inside that letter, they're complaining about that they see that there possibly could be a road that has a very dangerous intersection or a dangerous part in it where they feel like a traffic light should be placed. So what they're going to do is they're going to write a grievance or a complaint to the city mayor, stating their complaint. And how that could possibly be alleviated. So it's just the idea that a grievance can be considered a complaint. And in history, the colonists were forming, or the committees were forming grievances against the British government. As we keep going on, you're going to look at the Declaration of Independence, and in several parts of it, in several parts of the Declaration of Independence, and this is a key question within your lesson, is that they use the word for. For is used many times in the Declaration of Independence. And they actually, in one of your questions, they show you all the times that for is used. For is used as the representation as of the Parliament, the British Parliament. And you can see that they're saying for these reasons, for when you have done these reasons, that's our grievance, that's our justification why we want to break from the British government. So the word for represents the Parliament, and I have down here that is used and refers to the Parliament being those in charge within the England government. So understanding that the Parliament is tied with the word for throughout the Declaration of Independence. And then finally, just as a last review, we're going to go over the four main individuals that are found within this unit and who are highlighted. First being Thomas Jefferson. It's very important that we remember that Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence. The next would be John Adams. Continue to remember that John Adams made minor edits to the Declaration of Independence. Next would be Thomas Paine. Thomas Paine argued independence in his written document or the written pamphlet, the Common Sense. So he was the writer of Common Sense, but inside that pamphlet or written document, he was arguing for independence against or away from the British government. And then finally, King George, who is the leader, King George III, who was the leader of England at that time, he felt as if the grievances against England were a sign of treason. So anything that they were doing over there in the colony that were saying they wanted to gain their own independence, he felt that was straight treason against the country of England and the British rule. So the four key people that we need to go ahead and highlight throughout this lesson are Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, Thomas Paine, and King George. Now, as you have searched through this lesson and you're answering the questions, please use the material that's provided in your lesson